Hey, if you want to watch a great podcast that none of us are on, check out Best Movies Never Made. Available every other Monday from screenwriter Josh Miller and producer Steven Scarlatta as they go behind the scenes of some of the greatest movies never made with fantastic guests like
Steve Melching,
Ashley Miller,
and a lot of other people you have heard of.
And not Darren Doctorman.
Yet.
Oh.
I don't know. Maybe you'll be on the show. They just invited me to be on an episode about James Bond. I wonder why. Maybe it's because I have a new book out called Nobody Does It Better, The Oral History of James Bond, available now wherever you get your books. If you're a fan of Inglorious Trexperts, you're going to love Trexperts Briefing Room, a new series.
Briefing Room? What is that?
I was about to explain, then you interrupted me.
Sorry.
It's curated audio commentaries of classic Star Trek episodes from the original series all the way through Enterprise. You're going to love it as we explore the behind-the-scenes making of all these wonderful Star Trek episodes with cast and crew that you would never expect to hear doing audio commentaries on Star Trek.
Sounds like fun.
It will be. And you can find it on the Inglorious Trexperts podcast feed and on the new Trexperts Briefing podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts.
Let's go see
what's out there. Hey, this is Mark A. Altman, and if you're a fan of the only gentleman secret agent with a license to kill and thrill, you should pick up my new James Bond oral history, Nobody Does It Better, available now in hardcover, audio, and digital, wherever books are sold.
do you expect me to read?
No, I expect you to buy it.
Hello, and welcome to our inaugural episode of the Cartoon Barroom. I am your co-host, Steven Melching, and this is a show where we invite experts and industry professionals to pull up a stool and talk about all things animation. And now I will introduce you to our co-host, Ashley Edward Miller.
Hey there, folks. I don't know if that's trademarked, if I can even call people folks on the show, but by God, I'm going to do it right now. And, before I get too caught up in myself, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our very first inaugural guests, some people who are very special to us personally, have been friends of ours for a very long time. You know him as the host of Robservations, on loan from the Burnettwork, Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, gentlemen, it's a great honor to do anything with the two of you because obviously your careers are much more successful than mine, and I've admired you for years, wanting to be anywhere near the two of you, and it is just knowing how you're not only both knowledgeable about animation, but you now both work in animation. Steve's worked in animation for a long, long time, so this is a great honor for me.
Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you. Are we using three names now? I didn't get the memo. I didn't use my third name, my middle name.
Yeah, well, yeah. Can we make up a name for you, Steve? Steven Melching.
I don't have a middle name, so we're going to definitely have to make something up for me.
Those dulcet tones belong to the voice of the Legion of Superheroes, Superboy.
Technically Superman, but we'll go on.
Well,
we couldn't use Superboy. It was a trademark thing.
Stupid trademarks. and a man, you know what? He's my Superman. I have known him since we were 18 years old.
Yeah.
And we lived across the hall from each other in our college dormitory.
DuPont.
And he is the author it's the voiceover actor.
Voiceover voice actor.
Voiceover voice actor. I knew there was a double word in there. The voiceover voice actor with his lovely wife, Mr. Yuri Lowenthal.
My wife's name is Mr. Yuri Lowenthal?
Yes.
She should be so lucky.
We know who wears the pants in your family.
Thank you. Yes, you do. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here, as I have been to embark on any shenanigans with you since college. So
that's so funny because Rob and I met in college as well. Although we weren't neighbors in the dorm, but we were in a class or two together.
We were.
Really?
We got to meet George Clayton Johnson together, if memory serves.
And Abraham Polanski.
Oh, that's right. Tales, was it Night in the City or Tales of the City? That's right. And Joel Schumacher.
I don't think I was there for Schumacher.
Oh,
I
you
missed
didn't
that
work
one,
there?
I think.
No.
Was that during the nipples on the Batsuit era, or was that more Lost Boys?
No, that predated that. That was actually before Batman opened, the Tim Burton Batman opened. That was the 88-89 school year.
Okay.
Wow.
So he was
That's how
still
old
cool
we
then.
are.
He was still the guy who did the Lost Boys then.
Yes, he had done the Lost Boys and he had yet to make Flatliners.
Right.
Wow.
Hey, so guys, before we get started, I have to ask the most important question in any bar room, and that is, what are you having? Steve, what are you drinking? What's your poison?
I got a little Johnny Walker Blue Label happening here.
Nice. Breaking out the good stuff.
Yeah.
Very nice. Mr. Burnett.
Cheers.
What I'm usually drinking, really, I'm drinking Jameson.
Oh, you mean like the drink of choice for Starship SmackDown?
Yes, exactly. When am I not drinking Jameson?
You've been drinking Jameson as long as I've known you.
Yes, pretty
It's
much.
the same bottle. You've been nursing it for a very long time.
Oh, I only wish. Why do you think I don't work more? They know it's not just one bottle.
Yuri, what are you having, bud?
I'm drinking Woodinville. It's a bourbon. I'm a bourbon and a rye guy. So
Well, okay.
Your sense of humor certainly is.
It
Right.
really is. It's spelled differently, but and I myself, I'm drinking a Christmas present. I'm drinking Kurayoshi. I can't show because of Zoom. Kurayoshi 12. I got it for Christmas. It's my first experience with it. Obviously, because it's from Japan. It's a Highlands Scotch. Well, no, it's just Japanese whiskey, isn't it? It's not Scotch at all. There's nothing.
Well, it depends. They a lot of them get it from they lean on the whole. Hey, we're Japanese. We're doing it. But they get a lot of that stuff from Scotland.
Yeah, that's true. I guess it really depends on the water, which is a whole different conversation and a whole different podcast, except maybe not really. Maybe that's what we should talk about. We should just invite people from animation to talk about alcohol.
Right. Do we, I would be okay with that.
Right. It's like, you work in animation. You drink too much.
And exactly. Nothing like being in quarantine to, just really ramp up my day drinking. Yeah.
Yeah,
why don't you guys create a show where you anthropomorphize all the great liquors in the world? Like some kind of, it'd be great. Scottish, Japanese whiskeys versus the Irish whiskeys. I mean, the characters they write themselves.
Enough with the rocks already.
See, we've sold it. Call Netflix.
Right.
Right. Oh my God. So, all right,
So why animation?
That's a great question, Steve.
I ask myself that question every day. I think all of us, we live in a time when animation is more popular now than ever. But I dare say we all grew up with animation and loving animation. What were some of the shows you guys watched as kids?
Well, for me, one of the first animated shows that I remember loving was Johnny Quest.
Yes.
I was a huge fan of Johnny Quest. I obviously identified with Johnny Quest, and I really liked Race Bannon and Dr. Is it Benton Quest? Is that his name? I liked the whole milieu of it, that adventure. When you're a kid, I think the first characters that you know and love and you follow are animated characters, whether it's in a Disney feature or whether it's in an episodic show. I remember, thinking that Haji and Johnny and Bandit had this great relationship. I'm like, I want a friend like Haji and I want a dog like Bandit.
Right.
And I want my dad to have that jet, know?
Yeah.
And I want my life to have that amazing jazzy soundtrack.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah.
And that was another thing. It was, I think, of all, when we were kids, that soundtrack and whether it was Star Trek or the original Twilight Zone, those music cues, when you heard them, they were like this Pavlovian, you had a response to it. It was ingrained in you, something good was going to happen when you heard that music.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's glad you mentioned Star Trek, because I want to say I may have actually come to Star Trek through the animated series before the live action series. I have vivid memories of watching both of them, but I can't say for sure which one came first. But I definitely remembered those music cues that they used over and over again, because they're amazing. And when who was it that put out the soundtrack? Was that La La Land?
La La Land, yeah. And Neil Bulk was involved.
Tremendous. And putting in that CD and listening to all those cues, the rush, they all just came back like beat for beat. You can anticipate every beat of that music. It's so iconic.
Yeah. Now, the thing that's kind of different about Johnny Quest, and it's funny that you mentioned that as the one that when you were a kid, that was the one, is Johnny Quest, if I recall correctly, was a prime time animated show.
Was it really? I have totally forgotten that.
But I think by the time that I got around to seeing it, it was probably already in syndication.
Mm-hmm.
So like the Flintstones and Johnny Quest were primetime animated shows when they first started. But I think Johnny Quest was in the 60s. So I probably saw it in the 70s for the first time. I think I remember seeing it in the afternoon.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Are we all roughly the same age?
Yeah, I think so. I know we are.
I think, I know you and I are.
Steve and I think, are the same age. We're old.
Yeah, I think we're a couple years older than you guys.
Yeah.
But I think we all essentially grew up in the 70s.
But we would have been consuming the same media.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're all contemporaries.
We would have been in the same elementary school together, maybe a couple grades apart. But
yeah. But I mean, what was interesting too is back then that animation was made for everyone. Like, even though Johnny Quest had kids in it, because it was prime time, it had to appeal to adults as well. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that we had when we had animation, whether it was watching classic Disney features and watching something like Johnny Quest, was it wasn't necessarily directed toward us as children. There was a certain sophistication, and same with the Star Trek animated series, which I also loved. It was written by the writers of the original series for the most part, and it had the same voice actors. And the stories, even though it was on Saturday morning television, they were fairly sophisticated. And I think that was, animation I never felt when I was a kid, I felt that I didn't like things that were made for kids other than Sesame Street and the Electric Company. Mm-hmm. I didn't, and I think the reason I gravitated towards something like Johnny Quest is it felt a little above me. I always like to punch up instead of punch down, and I felt Johnny Quest was showing me a world that I could grow up and be a part of.
I couldn't agree more. And the Flintstones was another favorite of mine. Made for primetime TV for adults, and my other very favorite growing up were the Warner Brothers Looney Tunes cartoons. And those were made for movie theaters in the 40s and 50s and 60s. I'm sorry, Yuri, I interrupted you.
No, I was just going to say, and I thank you for reminding me of a time when cartoons didn't have to be for kids, when they were making cartoons to be consumed by a wide variety, of age groups. And then it did seem like after a while there was a change where that came into animation, where it had to be for kids, and they had to be careful about what they did, and they had to make sure that you saw the parachutes and it was blue and red lasers, and you couldn't. And I'm trying to pinpoint exactly when that. I mean, it must have been like
83,
80s, 83.
I think it started in the late 70s with stuff like the Super Friends and a lot of those Saturday morning shows that were based on products like Pac-Man or things like that. And then there was that whole period in the 80s into the early 90s where you have a lot of these parental groups that became very concerned with imitatable violence and whatnot. And that had a big impact on the content of kids animation. That was right around the time I started working professionally in animation, where that was a big deal about use of language. And, I've got crazy stories about that. And thankfully, that's in large part gone away. And that was also a time where you consumed your animation in very few places. You would see it on the 3 networks on Saturday morning, and you might see it in an after school or before school block on a local channel. And nowadays you've got your Nickelodeons, your different flavors of Nickelodeon channels, and your different Disney channels,
Your
and
different
your
Cartoon Network channels, your Adult Swim. I mean, you know.
Yeah, your adults and your
Crunchyroll.
Netflix.
But
Yeah.
your Crunchyroll.
Hulu.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that we're in this incredible renaissance. We're like this, I would call this maybe the second renaissance for animation. The first one being that 1989 to 93 period of Fox Children's Network, Fox Kids Network, with Batman the Animated Series and X-Men the Animated Series and The Tick and Animaniacs and all that stuff.
Ghostbusters the series and Gargoyles and
Gargoyles, absolutely. And now we're in this period of in the last 10 years or so, this incredible growth in adult animation that is really great. It's really fun.
Well, yeah, because we grew up. I mean, the people that grew up watching animation, you know, as kids, they realized they've branched out, and there's been so many things that people have come in contact with that adults don't feel like, well, I can't watch animation; it's beneath me. And now that isn't true anymore. And I think a lot of that had to do, like Steve, you and I, we were anime fans growing up, and that was something they would bring over from Japan and make it for kids, even though it wasn't necessarily originally made for kids.
Right, Seven's Arc 7, and all the
Battle of the Planets.
Loved Battle of the Planets.
I mean, that's what I'm glad you went there, because I was going to take us there eventually. I mean, I definitely remember, and I miss, you know, like the death of Saturday morning as a cartoon. Like, I love that we can see cartoons whenever we want to, and there's a lot more. But I do feel some nostalgia for that Saturday morning experience as a kid. But anime, like, I fell in love with anime before I knew that it was anime. Like, I was like, Speed Racer is awesome, and you know, Star Blazers is awesome, and it wasn't until maybe like Robotech that I became aware that it was even really a Japanese show. That has, you know, to do with my, you know, my age and everything. But I mean, that was my everything, you know.
Yeah, my father was in the Air Force, so I grew up moving around the country, and we spent a few years from 76 to 79 living in Hawaii. And as such, we had a lot of Japanese television in Japanese language. So that's where I was first exposed to anime, and I watched stuff, and this was all subtitled, you know, Raideen, you know, Getter Robo G, and the original Power Rangers.
You weren't watching Battle of the Planets. You were watching Gatchaman.
With
like uncensored, uncut.
Yeah. And as an 8-year-old reading subtitles. And this is before Star Wars even came out. And then
Uchu Kaisen Yamato, and
exactly.
Star Blazers,
And then we moved from Hawaii to Virginia, actually not far from where Ashley was growing up, outside of Manassas, Virginia, watching Captain 20 in the afternoons. And that's where
I was in Arlington.
Well.
So I was growing up with Captain 20.
All know Captain 20. By the way, there's a great documentary about Captain 20. Maybe, Steve, you told me about it.
I would
on
watch
Amazon.
the shit out of that.
Yeah. I thought you told me about it, but anyway, it's great.
You've both been drinking.
We've both been drinking. Who knows? We're at the bar. We're having a bar conversation. I loved anime as a kid. Didn't even know it. My favorite shows were Marine Boy, Kimba, the White Lion. I loved Star Blazers.
Yes.
And, you know, we talked about Battle of the Planets, but I loved those shows. And it's funny because, I mean, I watched Marine Boy and Kimba in the early morning before school. Star Blazers was after school. But to me, those shows, like what I remember most about them is I actually remember the big emotions. It's like, I get it. They were recut for kids. They were presented as kids shows, but they didn't feel like kids shows to me. They felt like something very big and powerful was going on. And
there was epic scope in there. There were stakes. There were consequences. People died in those shows. Captain Avatar died, spoiler alert, in Star Blazers. Like, holy crap, man, he's dead. I loved him.
Right? Like, my favorite scene in that show was like, and it's like, you'd never see this in a kid's show today, when he just hauls off and like slaps Wildstar, right? I mean, come on. It doesn't get any better than that.
Well, also the doctor was always drunk. You know, he's always carrying his bottle of sake around, and
that they said was spring water from Earth.
Right.
Yeah, spring water from Earth. And I think also there was something else I wanted to mention. We got cable, and you couldn't get cable where we were, so my parents got this big giant antenna on the roof of our house so we could get Showtime. And one of the things that they would do is their interstitial programming on Showtime. This is 1980. A lot of it was really weird, bizarre animation from around the world. Like, I remember seeing a short by a woman named Sally Cruikshank called Quasi and the Quackadero. And it was this really weird, like surreal, and I would watch anything. And there was all kinds of, it led me to getting like Fritz the Cat on video. I didn't know who Ralph Bakshi was, and I didn't know what underground comics were at the time, but there was Fritz the Cat, 9 Lives of Fritz the Cat. And then, like Steve said, I didn't know anything about Getter Robo G, but then Showtime also put on this thing called Force 5, where they brought Starvengers, which was Getter Robo G, and then they had Guy King and Grendizer, and they had all the super robot shows from Japan in the 70s that I was able to see in the early 80s as a 13, 14-year-old. And I'm like, this is awesome. This is what Shogun Warriors, the toy line that they brought to America, we could never see those shows. And then you realize, these are all from animated shows. And it was a revelation.
Yeah. I had Raiden. That was the only one that I had. And it was like one of the greatest gifts. You look back in life and you're like, oh my God, my parents, I don't know how they did it, but they really nailed it that time.
Yeah.
I will never forget that.
Did you have the big one?
Yeah.
I'm so jealous. I never had the big one.
That was the only one of those that I ever had.
Yeah, the jumbo machiners.
Yeah. I mean, I
had the little die-cast ones.
Yeah.
Which were great. And I love those things. They
actually really well made. Yeah.
Super well made.
I still collect them.
I got a bunch on my shelf, invisible behind my background. Because my office is a mess because it's too friggin' small. But yeah, I love those really well-made Japanese die-cast toys, vehicles, and the precursors to the Transformers, which came along in late 70s, early 80s, which then, of course, became the basis for the television series. That kind of kicked off that 80s syndicated television boom with G.I. Joe and Thundercats, He-Man, Thundar the Barbarian.
Thundar the Barbarian, one of the weirdest shows on Saturday morning cartoons.
Dude. Ariel,
with Ookla the Mock. Ookla the Mock. What's a mock?
Him and I. Yeah, doesn't matter. Catch up.
Another thing too that I wanted to mention was not just Star Trek, but there was a Planet of the Apes animated series.
Yes, I remember
there
that
was
very
a
well.
Godzilla anime from the depths, 30 stories tall.
Wow. Breathing fire.
I mean, it was
Godzuki. Yeah,
and Godzuki. I mean, that stuff was that was classic, and all of that stuff really was totally it shaped. Because the thing is, I love the Planet of the Apes movies. But I didn't differentiate between the animated show. It was just more Planet of the Apes. Yeah. Just like Star Trek, the animated series, I didn't sit there and go, oh, well, this is the childlike kiddie version. It was like, nope, this is more Star Trek. Yeah. And that was all part of the same continuum.
For the record, the Godzilla cartoon, I love that cartoon. I remember the Calypso very well. Yes. And one of the things I did as a kid, and I think I've still got these stories sitting around someplace, and I have to dig them up. I would write episodes of the Godzilla cartoon about the crew of the Calypso and Godzilla and the monster he was fighting and what Godzuki was doing. So they've got to be around someplace. It was like, I got pitches, man. Like, put me on staff. I'm ready to rock. I'm ready to go. Like, who says I've only been writing animation for 2 years? I've been writing it since I was 2.
Well, in a similar vein, I loved watching cartoons as a kid and even into my high school years, which when it was decidedly not cool to be watching animation as a high schooler in the 80s. But I would come home after school and I would work on my Dungeons and Dragons, maps and whatnot, and watch cartoons. And my dad, who was, in the military, wasn't a big fan of me, sitting in front of the TV, working on this foolishness when I could be out, flipping hamburgers and earning minimum wage somewhere. And it was with great relish that years later, I began working on shows that were descendants of all the shows that I worked on. A He-Man show, I worked on multiple Transformers shows, I worked on Batman show. It was my job prep.
That was right.
I didn't know it at the time, but it was.
Did you get to lord it over your father?
Oh yeah. Like the years that I've made more money than him writing these cartoons was great.
I used to actually cut school to get home in time for the opening credits of Robotech because the music was so good and I didn't want to miss anything. I remember leaving early so I could get home to watch Robotech and then probably work on my Dungeons and Dragons maps after that.
People underestimate the importance and the power of music in animation. And it's unfortunate because I think, there's a lot of animation that treats it like it's live action, that it's, it's wallpaper. But I mean, is there really a better use of music or a better main title for an animated series than Star Blazers? Right? Like, it's like you associate that, the emotion in that is just, it's incredible.
And it tells the story. It gives you like a lot of classic shows. It gives you the setup for the show.
Right.
So the context.
We're off to outer space. We're saving Mother Earth to save human race. There you go. It's all you really need to know. Yeah.
And it's just thrilling.
Here he comes. Here comes Speed Racer. He's a demon on wheels. And there was something about that where, as a kid, you could immediately, even before the show started, you were participating in the experience because you knew the song.
Right.
And it was something that you could sing later, like later when you weren't watching the show in anticipation, like, ooh, I can't wait to see, I hope today's is the mammoth car.
Right. And you could sing it while you were playing with the toys. And the great thing about the toys then was, and look, man, it's like I have my Transformers and my G.I. Joes and all that other shit. But when you had those toys when the show came first, it was like the toys were a way to live inside of the show. And to make your own while you were waiting for that. I mean, that was Star Wars action, Star Wars figures where, they weren't getting those movies out fast enough. And after that first one, we didn't know if we'd get another one. That's right.
And so we were making our own movies with those action figures.
That's the whole reason anybody thinks Boba Fett is cool. Because all he does in the movies is throw Han Solo in the trunk of his car and drive away. That's it.
Right. Yeah.
That's the one thing he does.
He's a man of mystery.
Don't forget the first time we saw him. He was
animation.
Right. That's true. That's right. It's part of the holiday special.
And then we all I know I did. I mailed away for my free Boba Fett action figure with the proof of purchase seals, and that thing came. I still have it. It's on my shelf, also behind me. My original Boba Fett. It of course, not the missile firing version, but it is the version where the missile is glued in place.
Right. Yeah.
See, there's an episode we need to do. Right. We need to do an episode where we talk about the toys that came out of animation.
Yeah.
And animation that generated toys. And just talk about toys. Hey, Rob, do you know anything about toys?
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm still collecting the same Japanese animated super robot toys. Way too expensive now. Terrible. Yeah. But, there's something else I wanted to mention that was a big deal in my life was in 1981, I was 14. Summer of 81 was when Heavy Metal, the movie, came out.
Yes.
And that was an R-rated. I wasn't even old enough to get into it, so I had to get taken to it. And the combination of heavy metal music and people like Sammy Hagar and Don Felder or Devo, the soundtrack to heavy metal, and the fact that by that time I was really into hardcore horror novels, and there's a lot of horror and science fiction and sex elements and heavy metal. I'm like, yeah, man, animation has grown up, and I was there. And that's again getting into things like Fritz the Cat and these R-rated cartoons, and it was like a whole new world.
Well, it was mind blowing for me seeing that movie. And the first time I saw it was like when you sort of have HBO, and kids today can't relate to this because they don't get TV in the same way. But but back in the day, back when dinosaurs walked the earth and everything was in black and white, sometimes HBO would have a free weekend and there was sort of a signal if you weren't getting the free weekend, and you could kind of maybe sometimes halfway watch something. And I halfway watched the shit out of heavy metal. Until the summer I stayed with my grandmother, and then I just watched it every time it was on, and it blew my mind, man. Talk about, it's the importance of the music, the storytelling. Absolutely.
I have it on vinyl. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Right there. Yeah.
The soundtrack is awesome. It's awesome. But here's the other thing that's awesome about heavy metal, and it's something I think people maybe take for granted about animation in terms of what you can do. I don't know that they were always exactly successful because of the limitations of, just of resources, of budget. But what they really tried to capture in the episodes inside that anthology that was linked by the over story of the girl hearing the story from the Lochnar about all the people who had interacted with it. was they tried to capture the artistic style and intention of the creators of the original comics that had appeared in heavy metal, right? So
like Richard Corbin with Den.
Yeah,
Den,
absolutely.
yeah.
With the great John Candy starring as 15-year-old Den.
Den,
It's like 15 years, nothing.
Yeah.
Then boom, twice in one day. It's just awesome.
You die, she dies, everybody dies.
Exactly.
I still say that. That's one of my litmus tests. Sometimes I'll just throw that out and see who bites.
Right?
And it's rare. It is rare.
I've got an angle.
Captain Stern.
I fly better when I'm stoned.
Kindergarten prostitute ring. Good Nyborg, man.
My heavy metal thing was, and some of you who grew up in the same place that I did will remember the Fair Oaks Mall.
Yes.
I don't know if it's still there anymore. It's probably not. But Fair Oaks Mall, they would do midnight screenings when I was in high school of, they always do the same night, of Friday or Saturday night, I forget. But they would do, in one theater, they would do Rocky Horror Picture Show. And in the other theater, they do heavy metal.
Awesome.
And you were either one or the other. Like, you were either a Rocky Horror kid or you were a heavy metal kid. And I remember always going at the same time and thinking that afterwards, but because the runtime
There should be a rumble?
There was going to be like a rumble in it, but it's like heavy metal versus Rocky Horror. But I mean, that was the show that I used to, put the car in neutral and let it roll down the driveway and sneak out. And like, I was a good kid and I was a rule follower, but that was just one of those things that just turned me into a rebel. I was like, I'm going to risk everything to go to the midnight screenings of heavy metal. And we would just go and go and go and go and go.
I'm surprised to hear anyone say something good about the Fair Oaks Mall, because during my years there, I hated that mall. My parents always used to like to go there because it had a lot of clothing stores. But when I was there was no video arcade in that mall. There was no good bookstore. I mean, it was just like clothes and adult crap. Like, I wanted to go to the Chapel Hills Mall. That was where, not Chapel Hills, the Springfield Mall.
Springfield Mall, yeah.
There wasn't a good bookstore at Fair Oaks until my freshman year of college, which I know because for about 3 years before that, I had worked at Manassas Mall at a Walden Books. Because basically the beauty of it was you got a store discount on books, and if you tore the covers off of them, you just got them for free. You just sent them back. And my manager...
By the way, unbeknownst to both of us, I used to shop at that Walden Books, and I believe that's where I bought my very first monster manual for D&D in the Manassas Mall bookstore there.
Outstanding. I was going to say, is this going to be a story where you tell me about how you were the guy who was standing in the corner looking at the Playboys and trying to look cool?
Right.
And I was like, oh, it's Miss March. I helped open and it's now gone. It turned into something else, and now bookstores aren't even a thing anymore. A huge Brentano's in Fair Oaks. I spent a Thanksgiving doing like 80 hours, like getting that store open. So you're right. There wasn't a hell of a lot there unless you wanted clothes or random crap that moms like.
Yeah.
You know what else I was thinking about too, in terms of animation, was I don't think the influence of Star Wars can be forgotten here, because books like The Art of Star Wars came out and Ralph McQuarrie's Portfolio came out. And so painted artwork became something that I wanted. So I started collecting artwork like that, and it led me to comic book collecting again. Like, I liked comics when I was a kid, but then I got back into it when I was in junior high and high school. And that fueled an interest in anime and animation and world animation. So it all fed off of itself, really.
Yeah, I think Star Blazers didn't really become a thing in the United States until after Star Wars came out, even though the original series predated Star Wars.
That's right.
It was dubbed and syndicated in the U.S. afterwards and became successful.
No, and that, again, the storyline was so... I mean, what was really interesting about Star Blazers was it was serialized like shows today are. If you could have binged Star Blazers, it was a soap opera, and the stakes were high. The earth was at stake, literally, and it felt important. And when you watched it, I think Star Blazers, to be honest, might be the first bingeable show I remember watching as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
Because I couldn't wait to see the next episode.
Well, and you bring up a great point. It was one of the first serialized animated series where you come home from school if you had soccer practice or something and you missed an episode, you didn't know what happened. You missed part of the story. Mm-hmm. You'd have to wait 6 months until it repeated, and maybe you filled in the blanks.
Yeah, I literally ran home every day from school to make sure that I got to see Star Blazers. And man, if I was late or somebody was watching some talk show bull crap on the TV, and it was just, it was a crisis, man. It was a disaster. I was obsessed with that show. I was obsessed with that ship. So much so that for the longest time, because it's I grew up with it as Star Blazers, I could only think of the ship as the Argo. And now I finally got it in my head that it's the Yamato, which is cool, right? But it's but to me, it was the Argo.
Yeah.
No.
Argo, fuck yourself.
But also the villains were bad.
Yeah.
They weren't Dudley Do-Right, or he's not a villain, but it's not like Snidely
Whiplash.
Snidely Whiplash.
Yeah.
These are bad people, and they meant harm to our main characters, and there was no escaping them, and there was real peril. Yeah. And yet it was animated. So the idea that animation could encompass emotion as well, it didn't just make you laugh or make you, when Bambi's mom dies, it wasn't like that either, but it was something more. And I think the possibilities of animation as a storytelling medium were instilled in us in a very young age in a way that maybe that wasn't true later.
Well, you think about, and oh my God, we could probably do an entire show on Star Blazers, and by the way, we probably should. But, something like a character like Wildstar, right? Like Derek Wildstar. How could we not empathize with him as kids, right? It's he's an adult compared to us, but really his story is about a kid who is growing up into responsibility, and he's learning how to manage the expectations of this father figure of Captain Avatar, right? It's very interesting to me that even as a 5-year-old, a 6-year-old, that would translate for me, that I could get into that. And that's the thing that I remember the most. Obviously, I remember the wave motion gun the most.
Sure, let's be honest.
I remember the wave motion gun and the relationship between Wildstar and Captain Avatar more than anything else. And spoiler alert, Captain, we've talked about it, Captain Avatar dies, but it's, how Wildstar handles that, how he steps up, how he becomes a commander. It's all of those things. I think, what it tells me, and now I kind of look at my idiots who are, they're both 5 years old now, and I've got an 11-year-old, and how they watch these things. And I have to remind myself sometimes that they watch these things, I think, more deeply than I necessarily want to give them credit for. And I think at times, especially in the 80s, when kids TV started pandering to kids, that they weren't quite giving those kids enough credit for how they weren't. Television.
Animation owes it to kids to deal with those things and to talk to them like adults, or at least about more adult themes within their development. Just because you're right, I think they do. My kid comes away with stuff that I won't know until later when I'm putting him to bed, and he starts asking me all these questions about that episode of Gargoyles that we watched, or whatever it was. And yeah, I think animation owes it to kids, and they forgot. They thought it was about selling toys and breakfast cereal and sugar, and and I don't know. I don't know where
not
we lost
understanding what was selling the toy.
Right, exactly.
Other than the toy is cool.
Was an emotional connection. Yeah. And then I remember working at, and here's another Errol's Video. I don't remember if you remember
I totally
Errol's
remember.
Video.
I used to stand around the return bin all the time.
Yeah.
Come in. I was that guy. I was the return bin sniper.
Right. I remember you at my store. Not you exactly, but we had a you at my store.
Who is this kid? Why is he here all the time?
Right. But that was also my opportunity to, in high school to see more adult animation, because, we had Wizards and Fire and Ice and, all that, Bakshi stuff, and just really weird stuff that they were like, oh yeah, we need to, get more video out there. Put all these, weird animated movies that, that I hadn't seen before on the shelf. And then I would get to take home 6 movies. That's part of my deal. I got to take home 6 movies a night. And I would never be able to watch 6 movies in one night, but I would always take them out.
Yeah,
of course.
And every now and then, sometimes I would just take it out to see if what was on the cover actually happened in the film. And I would just fast forward. I'm like, there's no way that, that somebody's putting 2 shotguns together. Like that couldn't be in the film. Or, a triple bladed sword and one launches out. I would have to take the film home to see if what was on the cover was actually there. And I ended up seeing a lot of adult animation that way.
That was The Sword and the Sorcerer you just described.
Very good.
Well,
Very nice, Rob. Yes,
we all grew up in an interesting time in animation where there wasn't, I don't recall a whole lot of new animation being produced in the 70s and 80s. There was a lot of that cheap syndicated animation and some cheap Saturday morning animation. But Disney wasn't really putting out, we hadn't had the Disney Renaissance that's kind of started with the Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and that stuff, and then later Pixar coming in. Disney wasn't they were still releasing movies now and then, but it just wasn't the same. And there weren't these big blocks of new high quality animation that came along in the late 80s, early 90s on Fox Kids. So we had to we had a great mishmash of stuff from the 40s, 50s, 60s that we were watching.
Yeah.
I have to tell you the most significant animated moment in my life, this epiphany moment happened. I was 9, and my mom took me to see Logan's Run at the John Dan Cinema, and it was a double feature.
Was it the orgy scene?
No.
Oh, okay.
The second movie was Fantastic Planet.
And it was that's crazy.
So I'm watching this movie and we're staying there, and my mom and after like 10 minutes, for those of you who haven't seen Fantastic Planet, it's a Czechoslovakian French co-production. It was in 1973. It was a big film in France. It's based on a science fiction novel, but it's about a planet where human beings are basically pets and they're enslaved to these giant blue people. This is way before Avatar. They're the Ohms, and then the humans are the Ohms, and then the aliens are the Drogs. And in the first 10 minutes of the movie, a human woman and her baby are being played with by one of these giant blue animals, and the mother dies and the baby is taken as a pet. Turl, the main character in the movie. And my mom, after 10 minutes, grabbed me by the arm and said, I will not sit here and watch a movie where human beings are treated like ants. And she literally wrenched me out of the chair. I'm 9 years old, and takes me out of the theater. And it took me 3 years before I could go to a landmark cinema, a revival house, and there was a double feature of Wizards and Fantastic Planet. And I finally was able to sit down. First time I saw Wizards, first time I saw Fantastic Planet. And to this day, Fantastic Planet is not just one of my favorite animated movies, it's one of my favorite science fiction films.
Yeah.
And my mom, the only time she ever took me out of a movie theater was because of an animated film.
And she took you out of the theater to get you away from that, and instead cemented a love for that. I have to remember that as a parent now. I'm like, what were the things that my parents did because they were trying to keep me safe that actually made me want to go towards danger more? Yes. I'm trying to temper that a little bit in my own, child's, future.
I had the exact same experience, but it was Fritz the cat.
Oh.
Kidding. My mom, not even my mom, took me to see Fritz the cat. And it was
Street Fight. It was Street Fight, yeah.
I'll tell you one thing. I did bring Fritz the cat. First time I saw that was on video. It was on Warner Home Video. And I put it on and I was like, wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I think when I was a student at SC, they showed Heavy Traffic in a class, and I made sure to check that out.
And that was good too.
Yeah.
Guy's crazy, man.
No, for sure. And then, that was how we were introduced to, that was the Lord of the Rings that was my Lord of the Rings until Peter Jackson came along,
right.
was that. And the first time I ever saw rotoscoping, and I mean, it was all just still so weird. Like animation was still so weird.
Right.
Yeah, it was weird. There's a lot of weirds because those guys making it were all potheads and stoners and drug addicts in the 60s, man.
Yeah, we're dropping acid
Listening to
and making
acid rock.
cartoons. Yeah.
But then you get, well, I mean, with they finished the Lord of the Rings with the Return of the King, the Rankin Bass Return of the King, which also did the Rankin and Bass Hobbit.
Mhm.
There was some pretty cool music in there. I mean, it was like, where there's a whip, there's a way. I'm waiting for that to show up somehow, like some homage in the Peter Jackson trilogy. I was praying for it. It never happened. But
I showed my kid.
Greatest adventure is
what lies in store. Because I have those records. I play those records for my son, and we finally watched the Rankin Bass Hobbit, because I'm not going to let him watch Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings until much later. But I'm like, oh no, you can fucking watch The Hobbit. If I recall,
did you say it to him that way?
I was like, you can fucking watch this.
You can't watch Peter Jackson, Lord of the Rings, but you can fucking watch The Hobbit. Thanks, Dad. You're the best.
It was great because even on that, when they kill people, it's just they just sort of spin into the it's not it's hugely gory or anything. And we had been reading The Hobbit at the time, and it was perfect. It was perfect.
So let's talk about that transition, right, from childhood watching these things to adulthood, and what kind of things we found ourselves watching as adults, maybe even what we're watching now, that carries on in the tradition of the things that spoke to us when we were kids.
Much like video games, there was a time when I watched less animation, I played less video games, then I came back to it at a certain time, and I remember. I think we all, started coming back to it, Batman the Animated Series and Mask of the Phantasm, when they started paying attention to that, animation again, and, Animaniacs, and, when cartoons were like getting smart again, and it must have been the early 90s, I guess, when it started. That's when I sort of came back to it. And then I found a different level of anime. I found like the Ninja Scrolls and the Supernatural Beast Cities and the Urotsuki Doji, the Wandering Kid.
Wandering Kid.
Really, the really fucked up, like, holy shit.
The beginnings of hentai.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
What is he doing with those tentacles?
Tentacles, right.
But
What the hell is that?
It's funny that you say that, because the thing that really got me back into it seems cliche to say it now, was Akira.
Mm-hmm.
Because it was I was at USC. It was my summer before I went to USC, and I went to the San Diego Comic-Con for the first time, and I had read about Akira, and I bought a Japanese Laserdisc of Akira. It was not subtitled in English, and I took it home, and the opening of the whole bike chase gang fight at the beginning of Akira was, to my mind, I'd never seen light animated before. Yeah. Like the city lights and the neon and the
bikes driving by and the tracers, like the trails of light.
It was so, I can't.
And no After Effects, kids.
No. I can't tell you how much that affected me. And it really, I was not interested necessarily in animation. I'd read about Akira and Starlog, and it seemed like, I got to get this. And it was one of those things that I discovered because I'd read about it and found it and brought it home. It wasn't something anybody told me about. It was just one of those things that you'd read about in Starlog or Cinefantastique or something. And I went and got it. So the experience was not because someone else showed me. It was something that I had stumbled across, and I didn't even tell anybody I was interested in this. It was like this personal, oh, look at this. And I bought it and took it home. And the music.
The music.
Mm-hmm. That whole experience, the first 10, 15 minutes of Akira, whatever, was mind-blowing. And after that, I was getting Vampire Hunter D, and I was, the Urotsuki Doji, like you said, and
Blood, the Last Vampire.
All of this stuff was a whole new world. And I was buying Japanese laserdiscs of anime that were not in English, and I was watching Japanese movies in Japanese because that was the only way you could get them. And I'm like, I had no idea what was going on in Vampire Hunter D. I'm trying to he's got a hand and a mouth in his hand. It didn't matter. And the artwork was incredible. Yeah. And it was a lot more along the lines of like Brian Froud's book of his art when Dark Crystal came out. I had like Art of Dark Crystal or whatever, and seeing Japanese anime that had different styles, and I could tell it was Speed Racer on steroids, but it was like, wow.
Right. Yeah, Akira was huge. I think Akira changed everything.
It totally did. And had, frankly, I think, the best use of people shouting someone else's name since The Graduate.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like,
But also the attempt the attempt to create reality. Like, it wasn't stylized animation. When a military helicopter would fly by, it was a real military helicopter.
Yeah.
And cars look real. I mean, I remember Akira had like some bored motorist like sitting there waiting for the light to change when a motorcycle would come flying over his car and someone landed in his windshield.
Yeah.
And it freaked me out. I was like, somebody animated a bored motorist, to create that sense of reality, that verisimilitude. And I'm like, this is amazing. And it was different than anything I'd ever seen. It was incredible.
Yeah. Did anybody see that screening they did like a year ago at the Academy screening? They did like a anniversary screening, and a bunch of they had a bunch of people lined up on the stage afterwards to talk about it, who were all like, it was like Gendy and like just a bunch of like animators and people who had clearly been influenced by that and wanted to talk about it afterwards, and it was great seeing it on the big. It had been a long time since I'd seen it on the big screen, and that the score, which I is still in my heavy rotation on my phone.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the drums are incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually bought the first animation cell I ever bought was from Akira. It's from that motorcycle chase sequence.
Yeah.
I actually read the manga first.
Really?
Wow.
Because they were publishing it in the United States. And I think I don't know if it was Marvel was publishing it under.
Marvel was in color.
Fantagraphics
was it was beautiful. And I read that before I saw the movie. So I was very excited to see the movie. Very excited to see the movie. Yeah. And obviously there are differences because there always are.
Because the manga was way more intense. I mean,
it's like, because it's hugely long. It would to fully realize it, you'd have to do it as a mini series. You couldn't just pack it into 2 hours. And the fact that that movie like runs at 2 hours and you can understand what the hell is happening, to me is just, that's amazing. Although the subtitle version I think is much better than the dub.
Oh yeah,
in that regard.
Yeah.
But I think that really opened the door to a new wave of anime in America.
Mm-hmm.
There was all kinds of things, and I think something that can't be undersold or talked about enough is how that 90s wave of Japanese animation that includes things like Sailor Moon brought girls into fandom. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of material more that wasn't just Strawberry Shortcake, that it was a lot more than that. And if you grew up going to the San Diego Comic-Con, I mean, we've been going to it for decades now, watching that shift in fandom in the 90s was a big deal. And a lot of that was because of more female-oriented Japanese anime that was coming stateside.
Oh, sure. Yeah, the gender balance of Comic-Con has changed dramatically since I think I started going in 93 or 94, and it was probably 85% male when I started going, and I want to say it's close to 50-50 now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Probably. Yep.
And that's great. And I think animation is a big part of that. There are a tremendous amount of female animation fans and video games as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And the cosplay, of course, which is tied in both to video games and animation.
Yeah, in fact, there are conventions that, like, I went to like the MCA convention in London back
MCM.
Is it
MCM.
what is it? Yeah,
MCM.
Yeah. It's went to that like back in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
When Thor and X-Men were coming out, and I think it's like fucking 10 years ago.
Yeah.
and I walked onto that.
Stand down, Barton. Stand down.
Right. Because I walked onto that floor, and thank you, by the way. It's just like one silly little line, and oh my God, guys. And I walk onto that floor, and it is just wall to wall anime cosplayers. People wearing costumes for things I had no idea what it was. Right. And that was like one of the times it just opened my eyes to how much is out there that we've just never seen here. There's only now, I think, really becoming clear to most audiences, like, wow, like it's not just a big thing. It's there is incredible depth to the library.
Well, yeah, and Rob and I used to go to with a group of friends used to go to the Masquerade every Saturday night at Comic-Con, and we'd sit in the back and we were probably pretty obnoxious, but it was hilarious, and it was always fascinating to see all these things come out on stage, and like, I don't know what that is, but the crowd would get so energized by this semi-obscure video game or anime, and like, wow,
and they were
really
cool.
into this. Yeah.
You'd see these people with these beautifully crafted costumes, and it was the character design. Even though we didn't know what it was apparent that this stuff was really interesting. And I wasn't even aware of how much. Like, I remember you asked, I think one of you was talking about how did you get back into it. I think in the 90s, I had a level of interest that was bubbling up, that was always there, but it wasn't. But then I would walk into, say, I'd find an anime store here in LA, an anime store, and walk in, and the thing that really did it for me was a guy slipped me Legends of the Galactic Heroes, which is a Japanese, it became my favorite Japanese animation. It's a soap opera, not a soap opera, but it's an ongoing, it's like Game of Thrones meets World War II meets Lord of the Rings in space. And it's the story of these two warring galactic empires. And it is the original series was 110 episodes long, and it is the most complex. There's 100 main characters. It is so epic and so sprawling, and it was so adult. And it felt like I was reading, Shiner's Inside the Third Reich about the rise and fall, this 1,000-page book about the rise and fall of the Third Reich. It was so in-depth. And I didn't know what an OVA series was. I didn't know all that stuff. I didn't know much. And then when I started in on it, I'm like, my God, the level of storytelling. This was like reading a piece of literature, and it was amazing. And that's when I realized this is like mid to late 90s. And then getting into it, I realized there's a whole universe I was missing out on. And then I started really delving into various things and finding things, and I realized, my God, this world is enormous, and there's so much good stuff here, and I just had never seen it before.
And that's one of the things we want to do with this show, that I think Ashley and I want to do, is to like bring attention to some of these things that you may have never heard of before, that you might find really exciting to revisit or to see for the first time.
Especially now that it's more accessible, you can find that stuff. Because for a long time there was stuff like, I had heard about this show, but where the fuck would you find? Like, you can't. Right. There wasn't a place. There was pre-internet. Like, you couldn't just BitTorrent that shit. I mean, it was just not available. You would have to go. You would have to go to a convention and maybe just paw through things, and somebody will have done like their own transfer, whatever of something. Barely has subtitles. I mean, that's how you got that stuff.
Some crummy DVD bootleg with a color Xerox cover.
And the box office treatment is so much different now than it was then. Even like in the 90s, I remember going to see Princess Mononoke, Yuri, at the Williamsburg Community Theater.
At the Dog Street Theater,
the Dog Street Theater. Like, we didn't, it wasn't at like, the main movie theater. You had to go to a specialty art house theater to see it, right? I don't think I saw like a Miyazaki. I think it was Spirited Away. That was like what I saw in an actual real theater, a real theater that wasn't like an art house theater.
Yeah.
Now it's like Miyazaki comes out and it's like it's on 3 screens, and it's or it would be if it weren't for COVID.
If it weren't for a global pandemic, it's killing all theaters. Yeah.
And also magazines like New Type came out. These oversized, and suddenly it was all available, and they were including CD-ROMs that had episodes and trailers, and
you could get Shonen Jump and Shonen Jump in the fucking airport or whatever. Yeah,
and it completely changed, and it seems so funny to be talking about it this way, but it really feels like we grew up in the dark ages so long ago.
But,
well, now that we're here today, what are you guys watching now in terms of animation? Are there any shows that you're watching now? Any movies that are recent that you've enjoyed?
Yeah, I will. I find having a 4.5-year-old is a great opportunity to go back and watch through things that I sort of remember, but really wanted to go back to, like Gargoyles. I had never really gotten into it. And I'm, now it's on, Disney Plus. And I'm watching I've started at the beginning of Samurai Jack, and I'm watching Samurai Jack with him and like all of that stuff. And, starting back to the beginning of Clone Wars and starting, and just watching Clone Wars all the way through, which I never really did. And he's a great, gateway back into that stuff. But I'm also finding because I have a child now and he likes animation, stuff like, Tom Moore, he did Song of the Sea and Secret of Kells, and just came out with something on Apple Plus.
Wolfwalkers?
The Wolfwalkers, which was also great.
Oh.
It is so beautiful. What he does is he's like the Irish Miyazaki. Like, I don't know. But I mean, it is.
That's kind of like a Japanese whiskey, only different.
Right, exactly. So, but I'm finding stuff, and I'm places like Netflix and Hulu are doing their own shows, and they're taking chances, and they're doing some interesting stuff, and not all of it hits. But every now and then, like Kipo and the Wonder Beasts, or like something like, I'm like, holy shit, like this is crazy. Or the Thunderbirds redo on Amazon Prime is just the way to, I was so glad
great.
that I could.
Weta did that.
Yeah. And it's so good. And I was able to introduce my son to Thunderbirds with that first. And then that was the gateway drug to the old Thunderbirds, which he's like, well, can I watch that? I'm like, yes, you can. And because he had watched, the 22-minute episodes, he somehow, he could watch the hour-long, which sometimes, you go back to that, and some of it's really
the pacing is
Very
tough.
the pacing is gross, but I got him into that. So I've been going back and watching old stuff, but finding these new things are just great.
Yeah, well, speaking of Genndy Tartakovsky, I just finally watched Primal, which I think ended its run recently, which was a blast.
Which I have not been showing my son yet, but I've been watching.
Yes.
I'm going to wait on that one. I watched the first episode because, I'm like, my son loves dinosaurs. I'm like okay.
maybe not that
Daddy
much.
show.
I mean, I've had a similar experience with Caden, with my 11-year-old, of kind of showing him things and kind of experiencing some of these things with him, although it's been a little different, right? We watched the Clone Wars together. Thank you, Steve. We watched Star Blazers 2199, which was quite an experience because for me, it's both nostalgia and something new.
Oh, and it's awesome.
And it's awesome. And he loved every episode of it. And it's totally fantastic. I can't recommend it highly enough. I discovered Berserk on Crunchyroll, and I love that. That's fantastic. And I have to tell you, and this is one that even though, my son has become quite the consumer of superhero fare, I haven't let him watch, but is just holds a special place in my heart. I love this show. Harley Quinn.
Oh, it's great.
Fantastic. It's like they should call it Harley Quinn, We're Sorry About Birds of Prey. It's so great. It's so great. The performances are so great. It's like, it's actually very, very touching and emotional, like when it needs to be. But at the same time, it's just, you can't believe it. Like the Bane jokes are just awesome, off the hook. Like, and just like little subtle visual jokes. Like Bane walks in, like, and he's carrying a coffee cup, and the coffee cup says, "I am this coffee's reckoning." It's just, it's fantastic. So I love all that. Rob, how about you, man?
Well, I've been watching a lot of Makoto Shinkai made Your Name.
Yep.
And Weathering with You. Which I just watched, and they're kind of these sweeping romantic fantasies. Again, Japanese, the artwork is incredible, and I'm a huge fan of Satoshi Kon, who made the Paranoia Agent, which I just got a steelbook of.
Satoshi Kon, in many ways, is my Miyazaki.
Oh my God! And I mean, you look at Perfect Blue and Millennium Actress,
Tokyo Godfathers, which is a great Christmas movie. By the way, if you're looking for Christmas movies,
but unfortunately, he passed away. Yeah, and these are and
Paprika.
Oh. Yeah. Again, all this stuff, and it's so good. His thought process, amazing. And I recently rewatched the Triplets of Belleville, And
so great.
So great. And it's different than, what's interesting is the sensibility. What I really love about especially world animation is the sensibilities of different cultures. Mm-hmm. So like Triplets of Belleville is very French, obviously. The Weathering with You and Your Name are Japanese. And then I really like looking into like old Czechoslovakian and Russian, like Eastern Bloc animation during the communist era, because there was some really interesting animation happening then of all kinds, whether it was stop motion or cell animation. There's some really just great stuff. But Weathering with You is the last movie I watched that I was like, wow. And of course, you know, America's no slouch either in that category. We're doing some amazing work. I mean, I just watched Soul, and I found Soul to be maybe not top tier Pixar, but I was very moved by it. And the fact that you can still be moved by, it's amazing after 25, 26 years since Toy Story.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Pixar never fails to engage.
Yeah. And the animation in that film is spectacular, and a great score by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross with Baptiste doing the jazz numbers. It's fabulous. I bought the score the next day, and it's been in heavy rotation.
And you know, and let's not edge Spider-Verse into the Spider-Verse.
Yes.
Which just I mean, come on.
Again, not since Akira has anything animated light. And the city, the look, amazing, just amazing.
Yuri, you know a couple of things about Spider-Man.
I know a couple of things about Spider-Man.
You want to tell us something about you and Spider-Man?
But honestly, he's right over my shoulder.
Yeah,
that's my Earth 1048 Spider-Man.
Did you get the hot toy figure of that?
I have 3 of the Hot Toys figures from the game, and then
did they send those to you for free because you are goddamn Spider-Man?
Not always.
Yeah,
not always. I laid out way too much money for that, but I had to have it.
Wow, that's
I feel
amazing.
a certain ownership on that Spider-Man, and who has also been made canon in comics recently, and in that suit appears in Spider-Verse.
Yes.
Yeah, it was their sort of tip of the hat to, hey, we were probably playing the video game while we were making this movie.
And by the way, an incredible video game.
Yeah.
You know, and again, the combination, the confluence of animation and video games now, it's a very thin line.
Yeah.
And we're playing the animated shows that we wanted to be a part of when we were kids.
Exactly. Yeah. One of my favorite reviews said it's the best Spider-Man movie that we've ever seen. You know,
it was tremendous.
Yeah. It was one of those things where everything came together. The writing was top tier. The stories, the bits of the stories they chose, the direction they decided to go, just the cinematics and then the choices they made, and the people they got together to do it, and everybody was so clearly a fan, that was working on it, and it was just a joy. It was just a joy.
Well, I hate to say it, but I'm hearing it's last call here at the Cartoon Barroom, and I want to thank our guests, Robert Meyer Burnett, Yuri Lowenthal. I'm sorry, Yuri, we didn't get to talk too much about your career, but I hope you'll come back on and talk about all the tremendous work you've done in animation and tell us some great stories.
Just always consider me that guy that when the actual guest craps out at the last minute, you can Ash knows he can text me in the middle of the night, and I'll be like, yeah, hold on, let me fire up my computer. I'll be that guy.
Right there. I'm an actor, goddammit. There's a camera. It's like, what?
So, we're gonna wrap things up here at the Cartoon Barroom. I want to thank, on behalf of Ashley, our sound engineer, Bill Ritter, who does his level best to make us sound good in the era of
level best.
Our production coordinator, Zach Regatz, and our production associate, Peter Holmstrom, who help coordinate everything and make sure everything is recorded and all that stuff. And of course, our producer, Natalie Muscali from Electric Entertainment. If you enjoyed this podcast, please check out our sister shows, The 4:30 Movie, in which a group of industry professionals, including myself and Ashley Miller, curate a fantasy theme week of classic movies. The Inglorious Treksperts, the ultimate Star Trek podcast, which Ashley is also a frequent guest on, along with Rob Burnett. And of course, the best movies never made about films that never saw the light of a projector bulb. You can watch all these podcasts and much more on the free Electric Now video streaming app. Download it today at your favorite app store. So, Ashley, any last words?
I think that this has been a pretty great shakedown cruise. I've had a lot of fun with my good friends. And I believe that the phrase that should carry us out is, that's all, folks.
This show is produced by Dean Devlin and Mark A. Altman and is an Electric Surge Network production. Engineered by Bill Ritter for the Electric Surge Network.